Hi, I'm Ashton, and welcome to Patches and Parley. We're going to start with a spicy topic today, that is the one of transtrenders, because I have a lot to say on this. The day I'm filming this is Christmas Eve, so my dog on my bed has a jingly collar on, so if you hear jingle bells in the background, that's because my dog is moving around. I figured a good patch to sew on while talking about this would be this one, but it says, "It takes guts to be gentle and kind," with like, you know, kind of cartoonish picture guts on it, so like, haha, funny. But I believe that transtrender is a fucking dumbass word that a bunch of privileged people use to devalue other trans people, so let's talk about it. And I'm sewing on this patch today while I talk about this because I feel that we need to just be compassionate towards people. And I think if we were compassionate for like 5 seconds, we would find that maybe calling people transtrenders is not a good way to solve problems. That's just my take on it. If you haven't seen a Patches and Parley before, a Patches and Parley is when I talk about something controversial and sew something onto my jacket. A patch, usually. That's really the only thing I've ever sewn onto my jacket. I don't know what else I would. When I sew some human skin onto my jacket. Also, my phone is in like a very precarious position right now, so like if I look nervous, that's why. Okay, let's get started. I am ready to do some sewing. Yeah, I did a video over a year ago in July 2017, kind of like jokingly calling myself a transtrender and saying like the whole concept of transtrenders is transphobic and I don't appreciate it, which is still the case, but I want to go a bit more in depth. It's been a while since I've talked about it. So I was like, good Patches and Parley topic, cause let's go. It's been used a lot more recently by specifically transmasculine people. As a transmasculine person, I don't feel right speaking about what happens necessarily in the trans feminine community, but I don't think I've ever seen a trans feminine person calling another trans feminine person a transtrender, but I see it a shit ton in the trans masculine community, particularly with a lot of popular YouTubers like that you guys might watch, and I don't generally appreciate. But I have always had and do still obviously have a moral problem with this. I just poked myself with a needle. I mean, first things first, I have never seen a valid reason to criticize somebody else's gender. I think it's rude as hell and unnecessary. My philosophy, gender-wise, I guess, is like, let people identify how they want. You don't have to understand somebody else's gender to accept it and to respect it. You can just let people exist and let people identify however the fuck they want. Nobody needs to justify themselves to you for them to be valid. Like, I will use whatever pronouns somebody wants me to use for them. I don't care if they're neo-pronouns. I don't care what pronouns they are. I will use them. I don't have an issue with that. And I don't know why so many other people do. So from what I've seen online, the definition of a transtrender is somebody that pretends to be trans for attention. And first of all, being trans attracts majority negative attention, and if somebody wants negative attention, there are so many easier ways to do that than pretending to be trans. Unless somebody literally consciously decides one day, you know what, I'm going to go on the internet, create some profiles, and pretend to be a trans person so that I can get attention. If somebody does that, then okay. Then they're being trans for attention. But I've never, ever known somebody to do that. I've never known somebody to genuinely pretend to be trans for attention from the public. Sure, being trans can get you attention, but the majority of the time, it also comes with a lot of negative attention, e.g., transphobia. And I don't know anybody that would willingly put themselves through that. You're doing all this for attention is something that has been a counter-argument against LGBT people for ages. Like, one of the most LGBTQIA plus phobic, like, responses to somebody coming out a lot of the times is, oh, you're doing this for attention, you know, you'll come back on it tomorrow and you won't be gay or you won't be bi anymore. So immediately this brings me back to the rhetoric of homophobia and biphobia, because people have used this as an argument against LGBT people for so long. Like, this isn't a new argument, you know, it's not something that I feel like I should even have to deconstruct, but here we are. So a lot of the times people will call people without dysphoria transtrenders. And depending on how long you've been on my channel, you may or may not know that I believe you don't need dysphoria to be trans. And I don't think I've done a comprehensive video on that, but I have stated it a few times. And the main reason that I believe this is because people define dysphoria differently. Some people see being uncomfortable with the sex you were assigned at birth as dysphoria. Some people just see that as being uncomfortable with the sex you were assigned at birth. Because that's the real definition of being trans, is not identifying with the gender you were assigned at birth. And for me, I would consider that a type of dysphoria in a way. But for some people, the simple, like, existence as a trans person is not dysphoria. For me, I have a shit ton of dysphoria. Like, I do. There's no denying that. But I don't think that's what makes me trans. I see myself as trans more because I identify differently than the label that the doctors slapped on me when I popped out of the womb, you know? I don't think somebody needs dysphoria, diagnosed or not, to be considered trans. Identities are not purely based out of suffering. You wouldn't say that a gay person can only be gay if they've experienced internalized homophobia, and that's like a really shitty analogy, I know, but my main point is that identities are not purely based on suffering. And dysphoria sucks. I completely realize that. But a lot of the times people don't even realize they have dysphoria until after they realize they're trans. Dysphoria is not the only thing, and it is not the defining thing about being trans. I believe from a sociology perspective and from like a psychology perspective that everybody experiences gender differently. Nobody feels their own identities the same way. I may have the same gender identity as another non-binary trans guy, but we likely haven't had the exact same experiences. My dad and my brother have the same identity as cisgender males, but I doubt either of them feel that gender the same way. Gender is something that's difficult to describe. Like, I could ask any cis person to describe their gender identity, and it would be pretty fucking difficult for them to do. Unless they're, you know, really transphobic and just say, well, I have a dick, so I'm a man. You know, that's a whole different story. And a lot of people that argue you do need dysphoria to be trans will say, well, how do you know that you're trans if you don't experience dysphoria? There are a lot of reasons that you can figure out you're trans. Dysphoria doesn't have to be one of them. You can question your gender identity and you can explore your gender identity without experiencing dysphoria at first, you know? I think the important thing is that sometimes people don't realize dysphoria until after they realize they're trans. The only requirement of being trans is that you don't identify the same way you were assigned at birth. And not everybody that does identify that way has dysphoria. For example, would you say that somebody who transitioned like 10 years ago, they always passed, they've been on hormones for like 7 years, they never experienced dysphoria anymore because they've had all the surgeries they want? Would you say that they're no longer trans because they just don't experience dysphoria? No, you wouldn't. And sure, do I understand how somebody could be trans without experiencing dysphoria? Not entirely, because for me, my dysphoria is heavily tied to my gender. But I'm not going to completely discount somebody else's experience of gender just because it's not the same as my own. That's silly. That's irrational. I completely recognize and I completely understand that not everybody has the same experience as me. And therefore, I don't require others to have the same experience as me for me to see them as valid. I just think that's a really shitty thing to do and to say. I understand people not understanding being trans without dysphoria, but what I don't understand is people completely disregarding others' identities purely because they don't experience gender the same way. If somebody identifies as a male, let them. It's literally not hurting anybody. People that use the word transgender to devalue people's identities also will say that like transtrenders are ruining the trans community because they're taking away resources from trans people. But please explain to me what resources like transtrenders are taking away. People that call out transtrenders will also criticize the way that they present themselves. So they'll see a non-binary person that presents as more typically feminine and they'll say, you can't be non-binary because you present femininely. Not true. People can present one way and identify another way, and nobody can stop them from doing that. Like, I'm sorry if your fragile mind can simply not comprehend people wanting to present like however the fuck they want. Your gender expression and your expression as a human in general doesn't always exactly correlate with your gender identity, and that's okay. There's no set of rules for being transgender. I don't understand why some trans people will like praise a cis man doing makeup and turn around and look at a trans man that does makeup and say, oh, you're not trans because if you were, wearing makeup would give you dysphoria. It's just ridiculous. Policing other people's genders isn't going to get the trans community anywhere. It's unnecessary. Hell, I would say it's transphobic. Policing other people's genders just for the hell of it isn't going to get the trans community anywhere. It's not helping anything. It's ridiculous. It's unnecessary. I highly discourage it. At the end of the day, I just want people to be happy. And if what makes somebody happy is presenting one way on the internet, then let them do it. Like, it's literally hurting 0 people. I've also seen people argue that transtrenders make the trans community look ridiculous, but I think what makes the trans community look ridiculous is a shit ton of cis-passing trans guys going off about some gender non-conforming person on Twitter because they think they're not trans enough. I think that looks pretty ridiculous. It also appears as if a lot of the people that call out people for being transgenders don't understand allowing people to like express themselves or explore themselves. People are allowed to explore their genders. They're allowed to explore their gender expression. They're allowed to explore their sexuality. The first gender that I identified with was gender fluid, and I used they, them pronouns exclusively. And that went on for a year. And sure, maybe it was like a phase for me, but it helped me understand what my identity is and what I'm truly comfortable with. And I don't regret that in any way. Another issue I have with the concept and the word transgender is it insinuates that being trans is some sort of trend, like a fashion statement or some shit, but like, it's not. If being trans was trendy, there'd be a hell of a lot more trans people on runways. Victoria's Secret would probably allow them in their shows. And yes, more and more people have been coming out as trans, but that's not because it's a trend. That's not because they're hopping onto a bandwagon. That's because as trans people have more and more visibility in the media, it's easier for people to look at a trans person and say, that's me. It's easier for people to see that being trans is something that exists and it's a viable option when you're uncomfortable with the gender you were assigned at birth. Trans issues being more widely discussed is a good thing because it allows people that may not have seen it otherwise to be educated on trans issues and to be educated on trans rights. And when that happens, sure, more people will come out as trans because more trans people will realize who they are. The reality is there's no way that you online can look at somebody and tell whether or not they're trans. You can't look into their mind. You can't read their mind. That's not a possible thing, but what you can do is listen to how people describe themselves and just let them exist. Wild concept, I know, but maybe we should just let people express their genders and like listen to them and validate them instead of attacking people over every single possibly gendered thing they do to invalidate their identities entirely. I don't understand it. In what world is being transgender cool? Like, transphobia exists literally all over the place. Being trans isn't a trend. Being trans isn't cool or something people do to fit in. That doesn't make any sense. And I feel like if people were pretending to be trans, they'd realize pretty fucking quickly the reality of the situation, and then they'd be like, oh wait, shit, this is actually terrible. I do love being trans because it's a part of who I am, and I wouldn't be myself if I wasn't trans. And it's not a bad thing to love being trans because you love yourself. Why don't we just let people exist? Why don't we just let people express their genders as they want to? It's not that big of a deal. If somebody ends up changing their identity in the future because what they first identified as doesn't exactly fit, that's fine. If somebody's exploring their identity for a while and tries to go by a couple different sets of pronouns and they settle on the same one that they were assigned at birth, that's fine. If somebody explores their identity and ends up being cis, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with exploring their gender. I would encourage people to explore their gender and explore their gender expression because it can be a really freeing thing, even if you end up in the same place you started. And I feel like the issue with people calling people transgenders left and right is they're not allowing space for people to express themselves, and they're not allowing space for people to explore their identities and their expression. It's just really gatekeepy, and I don't understand why it's such a popular thing right now. Oftentimes people don't recognize when they're dysphoric. I realized I was trans before I realized I had dysphoria, because binding, making my chest look really flat, gave me gender euphoria. Gender euphoria of having a flat chest and of people around me helping me experiment with my pronouns. That was what made me realize I was trans. It wasn't, oh, I hate having a larger chest, I hate having a high voice. It was, I like it when my voice sounds deeper, I like it when my hair is shorter. And from that, I developed dysphoria in realizing that the feelings that I had about my chest previously, that was dysphoria. I didn't realize things were dysphoria until I realized how good they could feel. I didn't realize how shitty and invalidating she, her pronouns felt until I realized how good and validating he, him, and they, them feel for me. It's so easy to go online and find somebody that identifies as trans and pick apart their every move and decide for yourself and for your followers that they're not trans because you don't think they are. That's so easy to do. But why would you do that? I don't understand what kind of pleasure people get out of calling people transtrenders. I genuinely wonder, like, how do these people sleep at night knowing that they've just gone around all day and invalidated people's identities because it's so much fun for their followers. People can argue that the detransition rates have gone up all they want, but there's literally no evidence of that. Here's a great pie chart of the actual detransition rate. Do you see it? You can barely see it, right? Because that's how low it is. The majority of the people that are called transtrenders are people that are just coming out, younger people, usually that identify as transmasculine. And it sucks because I was there once, you know, I was one of those people once. I was a young trans person online. I came out online when I was 12 on Tumblr, and I was lucky that people were lovely there. The level of gatekeeping that goes on within the trans community is just something that I find absolutely abhorrent. I wish people would just respect that people experience gender differently. Like, it's... I feel like it's not that difficult a concept to understand. Just let people exist. Let people explore their identities. Let people explore their expression. They aren't harming anybody. Being trans isn't all about dysphoria. I don't experience dysphoria 24/7. And if in one moment I feel good about my body, that doesn't mean I'm suddenly not trans. People online love to pick out every last flaw you have, and they love to invalidate you. And that's really what these people are doing. I believe it's important to create a space where people can express themselves however they want, and a space where people can explore themselves. And sure, maybe try a few different pronouns, try a few different names, because it's not hurting anybody. I think it's healthy and it's good to explore your gender identity. But what I think is unhealthy is when people all around you are saying shit like, well, are you sure you're trans, or are you just like jumping on the trans bandwagon? Because it's not a fucking trend. Like, it never has been. A trend is Lululemon pants, or like tying your hair in a loose ponytail. A trend is not gender identity. It just doesn't make sense. If you know somebody personally who has told you, I am faking being trans for attention, then sure, maybe they would fit this description of what a transtrender, quote-unquote, truly is. But in that case, they probably need help in some other sort of way. If somebody is begging for attention to such an intense degree that they are faking a gender identity, then it's probably a call for help in some way. And you should probably listen to them before something happens. I just hate that there are trans people out there that will tell you you need dysphoria to be trans, and you need this list of however many things to be trans. There's no requirements. There is no test that you take when you, like, enter the trans community. If you think you may be trans, experiment. Experiment with your presentation. Experiment with what pronouns people use for you. Take that time. There is nothing wrong with taking that time to figure out who you are. And if people call you a trender because of it, then fuck them. You know what's best for you. At the end of the day, I can't stop anybody from calling people transtrenders, but what I can do is express that I support all trans people, whether or not they are validated by important Mr. Cis-passing white trans man on Twitter. You're allowed to explore who you are. If it takes you months, weeks, years to figure out who you are, then that's fine. Take that time. There is nothing wrong with that. Transtrenders aren't what makes the trans community get put down. Transphobes put down the trans community. Look, you can call out fake trans people as much as you want, but at the end of the day, people are going to exist whether you like it or not, and I don't think there is any point in deciding for other people what their identities are. It's ridiculous. You should just leave people alone, let people exist, and if they don't match your idea of what a trans person is, let them fucking be. If you're running around calling people who are expressing themselves transtrenders, I think you're the problem with the community. I don't think people that are exploring themselves and maybe trying out a couple different pronouns are the problem. Transphobes are going to be transphobes whether or not transtrenders exist or not. I think what's important in the community is to accept people regardless of their background and regardless of why they're trans. It literally doesn't matter. Let people exist, let people express themselves, let people use whatever pronouns they want. Let people be themselves. I don't think it's that difficult of a thing to understand. It's okay to explore your gender. It's okay to experiment and realize that maybe you're cis. Don't let anybody tell you that that's not okay. That's a toxic mindset. That's a way of pushing people back into the closet. That's a way of gatekeeping and refusing to let people express themselves because of your own insecurities. Don't ever let people tell you not to express yourself. Fight for that fucking right with every last cell, okay? I've been out as trans for 4 or 5 years now. I can't even keep track because I'm a mess. But as a confirmed trans person, I'm on hormones. I've had surgery twice now. I'm, for all intents and purposes, what these people would probably call a real trans person. And I'm telling you, if you've been called a transgender, you are just as fucking real as I am. There is no rule that says you need surgery or dysphoria to be trans. There are no rules to being trans. If you identify in a different way than what was put on your birth certificate, then you're allowed, quote unquote, to be trans. Don't let anybody tell you that you're not. I think the people seeking attention in this situation is people that are calling people transgenders because, bullying is cool now, apparently. I don't understand. Let people exist. Let people be trans in peace. Let people explore their gender in peace. Why are we calling people transgenders? Why is this a thing? Come on, guys. That's my rant on this topic, I think. Maybe I'll make a video in the future more coherently breaking down this topic. This was just my annoyances with the topic of transtrenders because I think it's just a toxic mindset to push people into saying they're not trans because they're not what your idea of trans is. I guess the gist is people experience gender differently. You are allowed to explore your gender. Nobody can stop you. I don't care what they say on the Twitter. Let yourself be comfortable with your gender. Let yourself explore. Let other people explore and let other people express however the fuck they want to. It's not hurting anybody, and don't let anybody ever tell you otherwise. Anyways, here's the patch that I've sewn on. It says it takes guts to be gentle and kind, because I believe in this situation, that's what we gotta do. Be gentle, be kind, let people have fun, let people explore their genders. It's not hurting anybody. What is hurting people is bullying innocent gender questioning people on the internet for being transgenders because they don't fit your exact definition of what gender is and what a trans person is and exactly what your experience of being trans is. That's ridiculous. Let people exist. Let people have fun. Let people express themselves. It's not hurting anybody. Okay, thank you. This has been Patches and Parley, and before I run out of breath and have an asthma attack, I'm just gonna go. I hate that people online are seeking out people to call transgenders because they don't see their gender as valid or because they don't have the same experiences. It's just ridiculous. Goodbye. I love you. I hope you know that your gender identity is valid whether you are still questioning or whether you have been questioning for years. It's okay to question for a long time, and it's okay to experiment for a long time, and I love you no matter where you are in your journey to figure out what the hell gender is, and I will talk to you later, maybe.